Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Good. We're here today to talk about managing the changing climate of business collections and everything what we are considering as business librarians when we're trying to make collections decisions, whether it's maintaining, needing to make cuts, needing to add new resources. And what we're really hoping today, after 3 brief presentations, is to basically have a facilitated discussion between everybody in the room around either topics that were brought up during the presentations or whatever you care to talk about. What are you caring about when it comes to collections? And we were hoping to get perspectives from both librarians and vendors. So we welcome you today. My name is Catherine Macy. I am a business and economics librarian at IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, the longest named university in the United States. Jeopardy question. This is?
Yeah, I'm Heather Howard. I'm a business information specialist at Purdue University.
And I'm Allison Fowler. I'm a business librarian at Texas A&M University.
So, we're going to get started with first my presentation, which is about determining value through collection assessment. I want to talk about the process I've used in regards to trying to assess my own collections. I'm a strong believer in holistic assessment that allows me to try to understand the value individual resources have in my collection with the context of my university. But just before we start with that, I just want to present a little bit of context. These numbers should not be unusual to you guys. Right now, Library Journal projected a 6% annual increase for journal content. In my experience, that runs pretty true for all business databases, whether it's journal or other types of data. But meanwhile, survey from the Association of Research Libraries shows that basically we're on average a 3% 5-year compound annual growth rate for our collections budgets. That's a significant gap that we're trying to manage while trying to meet our needs and trying to get new resources and all of those things. And when you consider that 52.7% of library budgets are spent on electronic materials at academic institutions. That is from the Chronicle of Higher Education's Almanac. It's a big concern for us. And so it's important to come up with a way to be able to understand how each sort of resource we have in our collection impacts the entire collection and figuring out ways to value that. My goal today, and for I hope everyone in this room, I'm like, wait, this picture's a little unclear, but it's like a rocky terrain. I want to figure out how we can bloom and have good relationships and be able to, grow flowers and, be able to meet the needs and for both vendors and us as librarians so we can better serve our patrons. So that's today's goal with both my conversation, my presentation, as well as my fellow speakers and whatever else this audience has to share. All right, so I want to talk about personally how I want to manage collections. This may or may not apply to every business librarian. Like, first off, I want to value resources in the context of library collections, my library's collection, and my user needs. I want to be able to, in order to be able to fill gaps where don't have content to serve either research and teaching needs and learning needs. I want to cancel my resources that aren't really being used. I want to be able to plan upfront and honest conversations with my vendors. I believe in transparency and being, hey, this is the situation we're in, we already have this content, we don't have that content, this is what we can afford. I want to have those types of conversations, and I really believe in order to do that, I have to have data and information to be able to really deeply dive into that. What I don't want to do, and this is personally for myself, I don't want to purchase duplicate content. So people go, I have this new thing on it. I'm like, yeah, but I already buy it. So if I already buy it, then I'm going to have to consider, do I cancel that other resource? Can I? It's a very complex decision. I want to cancel resources. I don't want to cancel resources that are used. And considering that whole 6% price increase, while my budget's at 3%, basically every 4 to 5 years, I'm looking at probably canceling a significant resource if I can't find a way to make it work. and whether or not that's coming up with creative solutions, trying to trim content in a certain way with one database versus another. That is the challenge I'm trying to consider. I don't make rush decisions. I know that some people have extra money at the end of the year and they can do these one-time purchases. My budget doesn't work that way. If I don't spend up all my money, it rolls over. Like right now I have a bit extra money, but that's literally for me planning so that I don't have to cancel something for a couple of years. And so that's how I work. I know other people, if you don't use it, it's gone, and so you need to do that. But it's important for me that my vendors understand that you can give me a last minute deal offer, I'm like, it's a one-time buy. I'm like, that's not how I make decisions. And I'm not a big fan of buying resources as a one-off because one person likes it. The thing about it is I'm trying to serve the greater research and teaching needs at my university. And if one researcher wants one set of data, oftentimes my answer, because I'm so tight in a budget, is you need to get a grant to pay for that. Or you need to talk to your school, because I work for my university library and I need to purchase things that are going to serve the greater population. And so I really do that. So that's just some context about me and how I make decisions. And the first thing I do when I'm trying to understand my collection was actually doing a user analysis. It's really important for me to understand what's going on with my key stakeholders. For my faculty, I've had conversations. I periodically send them surveys. I also basically research what they're publishing and where they're publishing, what they are researching, so that I can understand what type of data sources and journal resources that they're looking for. Now for my students, I did an exercise where I mapped their curriculum. I studied all their syllabi and signature key assignments, and trying to figure out what those information needs are for my undergraduate population. And I use that to figure out what we have resources that can support those assignments and support those classes, and where we're missing resources. For instance, I saw that we had a significant gap in business-to-business market research a couple of years ago. And so that was the big goal of something I had to figure out how to fix and find the money to fix. Now, once I have my user needs, it's important for me to actually start diving into my collection. And so I use a number of metrics. Some of them are qualitative metrics, and some of them are the traditional quantitative metrics. I look at price history, and I use price history to determine 3- and 5-year average price increases, and which we actually need like 6 years of data in order to do that. I also look at use and dollars per use. One metric that I want to start using and start getting deeper into is dollars per citation. I haven't quite got there yet. But those are like the traditional metrics a lot of people talk about. But the other thing I'm trying to understand, is this a core resource? Is this critical for teaching or research activity happening on my campus? Are there options out there that can replace a resource if budgets become really tight? Trying to understand, is this a core resource? Are there substitutes? Looking at the content coverage, I want to look at duplication, unique content, and understand where everything kind of meets and how it maps to the research needs and the curriculum needs. And lastly, one of the things I look at is a portion of spend. What that means is I figure out what percentage a particular resource is for my entire spend for the business collection as well as the library. And you probably are asking why I do that, and it really boils down to me setting priorities. I can't look at everything. There's only so much time in the day. So one of the things that I do is I will, like if it's an existing resource, I do a Pareto analysis. I look at do Pareto for both cost and the portion of spend, as well as use, to try to identify those 80% of resources that are making up 20% of my budget for use. So it's really funny that this Italian economist or mathematician, he was right on it. I have done Pareto analysis out in private industry when I was an analyst, and more often than not, you will find that there is a 20% count of your whatever vendors are that will make up 80% of your cost or 80% of your use statistics. And that is where I usually start looking because those will have higher impact. And then I also set thresholds for me to examine. Like I give an example, there's an over 5% average annual increase over 3 to 5 years. So if you happen to fall into that Pareto analysis where you're one of the top vendors, and you also have a history of high price increases, and it just triggers me to want to dive deeper. Is there a reason behind the changing prices? Is there increased content? Is that content actually being used? It basically allows me to dive deeper. It also allows me to see how everything fits in context to the rest of the collection. Now, new resources, I'm doing gap analysis. For instance, like I said, we were lacking business to business market research. I coordinate feedback to get feedback from key stakeholders. I like to do a lot of my trials in the summer and like summer 1, and I coordinate it so that there's hopefully a class that can use it and I get student feedback. But I'm also getting feedback from my faculty. It's really important for me to communicate expectations when I do that because sometimes faculty will fall in love with a resource. And I have to make it very clear from the get-go, you may fall in love with the resource, but if we get, quite frankly, if it turns out to be out of our range of what we can afford, and we have a lot of resources that can help one researcher, but I'm trying to meet the greater needs with the university library. And so I make it very clear that oftentimes we have an honest conversation, we start talking price, and then they understand with whatever decision I make. I have actually created a template that is available to people, and by the way, this presentation is online, that helps people if they want to do a similar analysis using the 80-20 rule, as well as looking at 5-year average increase or decrease. And I've set it up right now. You can add your own thresholds to it and very quickly analyze your collections. So feel free if you want to use it. It's available through my institution's IR. So this just kind of sums up what I do. I really believe a holistic review of my collection. It provides me the context necessary so I can do individual resource reviews. It really helps me when I have conversations with my vendors. I can have an honest conversation. I can talk about, I know the history of prices, use, how it's used. It allows me to be able to share, what my needs are, and also understand and plan, what can I afford to pay versus what can I not? What am I willing to give up? This is one of those things that this is really critical for me when I am planning negotiations. And ultimately, it's been successful for me. It's enabled me to add some new resources, despite the fact that my personal budget has gone down every year. I'm not increasing, it's actually gone down for me. That said, I'm probably gonna have a hard decision in the next couple of years. But it's allowed me to set goals. And I'm looking for creative ways to make sure that I can continue to meet those needs. And I'm probably gonna have some creative conversations with my vendors in the coming years as I try to figure out how to make sure I continue to do that. Thank you.
I'm gonna stand over here because this room is really awkward. And otherwise I'm like standing in the middle of that. This pillar is also very strange. So I want to talk about bringing critical librarianship into how we evaluate our business resources. As well as being a business librarian, I'm also liaison to Purdue's Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, which has been a really interesting kind of meshing of disciplines for me. And reading a lot of critical librarianship literature has helped me to start thinking about the way we look at these resources very differently. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Emily Drabinsky's Querying Catalog. Also, Sophia Noble just came and spoke at Purdue recently, which was fabulous. She's the author of Algorithms of Oppression, right? And in her book, she talks about how Google's algorithms they support the patriarchy and they support racism, right? And I'm I want to know if similar algorithms and similar problems are occurring in our databases that we're paying for, right? I don't know how to go about getting at this information exactly, but it's something I've just been thinking about and really hope we can have some good conversations about today. So what is critical librarianship? This is from critlib.org. They've got a lot of great resources. They actually have a whole, I think it's a Zotero catalog. It might be a different citation manager. But there's a public library where there's a ton of resources on critical librarianship you can go read about. But it's really just bringing the principles of social justice into our work in libraries, right, in any number of ways. These are things I've been thinking a lot about in terms of business resources. So how is the information acquired? And I'll talk a little bit about that more as well. But a lot of this information, as a business librarian, is not made for me and my patrons, right? It is made for corporations to buy, to use in business, right? Actual business. So how are they acquiring this information? Was anyone harmed in the acquisition process? So I'll talk about that as well, but a lot of what we buy are these really large-scale consumer surveys. How are these being done? What information are they gathering? Who was left out, right? We offer these to our students and our patrons as, like, yes, this is how you see this information about our consumers, but who are we missing in these surveys? Who owns the company that we're buying information from? What are we contributing to by giving them our money, right? And who will have access to this information and who will not? I think about this a lot as a land-grant university as well. I buy these databases for my patrons, for my students, but ultimately the mission of Purdue is to serve everybody in the state of Indiana, right? So there's kind of an ethical dilemma there when I'm buying these things that only our students can use. So some examples of what I mean by this. That's hard to read, I'm sorry. But S&P, Moody's, Fitch, we buy things from these people all of the time as business librarians. They really contributed to that big crisis we all went through in 07, 08, right? So we're giving them big piles of money now. They helped to collapse our economy, right? It's not to say that the information we're not giving them, or we're not getting from them is solid, but it's still something to think about, right? Like they gave overinflated credit ratings. So what have they done to make sure this isn't going to happen going forward? I don't know. I haven't read into this yet, and this is something I'm really interested in having conversations with vendors about. And again, this is none of this is to disparage our vendors. I have very good relationships with our vendors. They provide us with really wonderful products, but I think these are conversations we all need to be having in order to make sure we make wise decisions together going forward. This is one of these online surveys. I found this really interesting. And this is a database I love. I have blocked out who it is. I'm not going to call them out. Some of you who are business librarians may recognize this format, though. In this case, they gather information for their reports based on surveys they do of about 2,000 people. This is broken down by men and women. So first of all, there's an issue there, right? We're still collecting gender in the binary. When this is being sent out to people who don't identify as one of those, is this causing harm to them? Is this making them feel like they're not included in our consumer decisions, right? Clearly, we're not evaluating our business decisions based on anything other than the binary. This is not just this consumer survey. It's every consumer survey that I currently have access to is gender in the binary. We're also skewed really heavily over here to people who have wealth, right? That's who we're polling. That is not the income distribution of folks in the US, right? That is the average distribution of the people that we're polling. These are their quotas to fill to say that they have a complete survey to do one of these reports. So I found that very interesting as well. And the age, you can see how they divide the ages as well. I'm not sure if that's representative or not, but this is what they consider a quota. So I found that really fascinating. Also, the way this survey is done is over the internet. So that also helps explain why we skew a little bit higher on the income, because we're missing people who don't have access to the internet, people who choose not to take internet surveys, right? So that's a gap in our data from the way that this is collected. Problematic categories. So these are fascinating to me. These, I believe, are the Experian mosaic categories. Category A is the power elite, and we have things like American royalty, platinum prosperity, kids and Cabernet. I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see why some of these might be interesting to think about, right? Again, in terms of this, the way we're segmenting this data, the way we're presenting it to our patrons, and this is being done for us. Here's further ones, you know, sports utility families, fast track couples, unspoiled splendor.
These are actual ones you pulled out.
Oh yeah, you can pull it. This goes on and on and on. I only have 3 sets of these right now, but this goes through most of the alphabet.
Yeah, they're psychographic profiles that they have created.
Mm-hmm.
Also, no stereotypes.
Oh, well, here's one of the definitions for these. For one of my favorite, stock cars and state parks, right? A lot of folks in Indiana fall into this category where I'm at. They might be very offended to know that they've been categorized as stock cars and state parks, right? And this isn't even the most offensive of these. Middle-class couples and families living in more remote and rural communities. Stock cars and state parks contains mostly middle-class families and empty nesters living in remote rural communities. The adults have turned high school diplomas and some college education into decent wages from a mix of service sector, farm, and blue-collar jobs. Their kids are mostly grown and out of the house, although a quarter of the households still have adult children at home. These houses, situated on substantial lots, are large enough to be a bargain at a less than average $185,000. Far from urban centers, the neighborhoods where this segment lives are safe enough. No one worries about crime or violence. Right? These are bizarro. And again, we're paying money for these. So and I don't know what the solution is, right?
Do these get used? Like who?
Marketing
yeah,
faculty
absolutely.
absolutely love
Okay.
psychographic
Yes.
profiles like this.
Awful.
These,
They're
I
used
can,
in politics, they're used in business all the time.
absolutely, absolutely. I can find these in at least 3 databases I can think of off the top of my head, right, that we pay for.
And the thing is marketing faculty want them and they're teaching their students to use them because
Because that's what they're gonna use out in.
Absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely.
Like I
So,
said, they use it in politics too.
yes,
Yep.
100%, right. This is used to market to different
I mean, they
different groups.
They were talking the election, they were talking, you know, they were talking the suburban housewives, I mean, that was, they were using these same groups, they're all used not just in business.
Do these also, like, we have a similar product in Canada that actually breaks down into categories like this by racial category as well.
Oh, yeah.
So the offensiveness, like, just ratchets up super high. Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Excellent segue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, right? Trailer Park City, very rich Asians, very Spanish, right? And I don't, this is something I really want, I'm interested in talking to you all about because I
believe this.
yeah, right, like these are in our resources. And I would love to hear from vendors about this too, and I want to know if these conversations are having with, are only, if only academia is concerned about this or people in the business world are concerned. Because again, we are not the primary consumers for this information, right? We're on these discounted academic contracts, we're not even paying full price for this stuff, right? So it puts us in a very odd spot to have conversations with our vendors about this when we're like a big demo for them, right? For the folks going out into the business world. Make sure. Yeah, so I'm really concerned about, that might be, yeah. I'm really concerned about is the data and databases that we are being asked to buy ethical, right, when we're considering these new resources. It's a really hard conversation to have with our marketing faculty who are using this all of the time right now. They use it in their research, use it in their instruction, but I want to think about it also in the context of picking up new resources, right? So I don't know, I don't have a lot of answers, which is why it's really nice. This is a library lunch. I'd love to talk to all of you about this more. Now, on to Alex.
I'm gonna bring up the final leg.
I'm going to bring up the final leg of this. I'm going to talk about managing accessibility with business resources. I'm going to be talking about accessibility from a purely software sort of standpoint. So Heather kind of alluded to, she thinks about being a land-grant university and making sure that her resources are accessible to the public as well as her students. I'm going to be focusing more on accessibility as we would think about it in terms of people with disabilities accessing our resources. So a little bit of background on why accessibility is becoming more of a hot topic in higher education right now. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was a landmark act that prohibited discrimination for people with disabilities. And within this act, there are various different sections that talk about everything from job access to information access, which is where that section 508 you might hear a lot about comes into play. Section 508 really details the access that has to be put into place, information resources, for people with disabilities to be able to access a specific resource. And it basically says that any resource that is used by a federal entity has to meet certain circumstances and be accessible. And they detail guidelines that I'll talk about in just a little bit about how these things are to be made accessible. And last year, in January of 2017, a big revamp of the Section 508 standards was done. And they really had revamped it for the first time within 10 years. So you can understand that in those 10 years, the internet has changed a lot, technology has changed a lot, so they were really due for an update. And all of the new updates had to be in compliance by January of 2018 this year. So many institutes of higher education were scrambling a little bit to make sure that everything was up to date, because there have been lawsuits, mostly from the public-facing side of university websites, because that's what people can see and that's what they can grab onto and see if there are any problems when they're not being held up to code. But there have been things, there's an example at UC Berkeley, they had to take down something like 20,000 lecture videos that they had put up on their website, and they weren't closed captioned, they weren't accessible. And they were being sued for providing this kind of content without the appropriate accessibility resources in place. And so they actually just took them all down because they either couldn't or wouldn't agree to make them accessible. So higher institutes of higher education are really on alert of this, because even if they're not federal entities, they are still receiving money either in the way of federal money along with state money. They usually have some sort of grants or initiatives that are funded by federal money. And oftentimes states will have their own codes for accessibility that very closely resemble these Section 508 codes. So I put the exact wording on there, that it mandates that all electronic and information technology developed, procured, maintained, or used by the federal government be accessible to people with disabilities. And so that would very much mean our library databases. And I think that this hasn't been so much of a problem because our library databases are not public-facing for the most part. You have to be a student, you have to be a faculty member and be able to log on and have the appropriate credentials to get into these databases. But I think that with Section 508, it's going to start being more of an issue for higher education to be compliant and to make sure that they're not exposing themselves to risk, and more importantly, that they're providing ways that everything in the higher education setting is accessible, not just a public-facing website, but going down to our library resources or internal resources that they're using as well. So I put up some examples of, when we talk about accessibility, what are we exactly talking about? This can be things like screen readers. So if you've heard of JAWS, different kinds of software for people with visual difficulties that can use these screen readers. There's certain types of screen magnification software that can enlarge print, that can enlarge images. There's text readers to make it audio so that the text will actually be read. There's different kinds of speech input software so that you can talk to the software and it will be able to go where you want to go. So maybe somebody with limited mobility in their hands would be able to tell the program what to do, and it would be able to navigate for them. And then also there are ways of alternate input devices. So this can be, again, if somebody has limited mobility, there's certain eye tracking software. Sometimes people have pointers that they can move with their head that will also allow them to manipulate the software. And it's hard to say, there's no real sure way to say if something is accessible and meets all of these things or not. There's quite a wide array of what is considered accessible or not, and I'll start to talk about this a little bit more in my next slides. It's not as simple as just, yes, something's accessible, or no, something's not. There's quite a range of accessibility, and currently it's very subjective. It's up to people to determine whether something is accessible or not. So there are a couple ways that we as librarians kind of think about confirming the accessibility of a resource resource. And some of this is contract language. A lot of our licenses have things in them that say, vendors will say something like, we'll agree to adhere to Section 508 standards or something of the like, or we'll make every effort possible. So there's sometimes these blanket statements that are put into these licenses. And I'm not sure how often those are backed up. I'm not quite sure how often we have to point to those or we have to use those, but oftentimes there's some sort of contract language. And I guess one of the things that I'm wanting to hear about is some of those maybe different experiences with contract language. And if you do pay close attention, is it a blanket statement or what kinds of variations there might be from that? VPATs, which are voluntary product accessibility templates. I'll talk more about this in the next slide. There's something at my institution that we do that I'll talk about. Self-assessment, so if you're able to use some of the tools that I mentioned on the first slide, you yourself are able to use the software and go in and use a particular database to see how user-friendly it is. Just because something can be used with a screen reader or screen magnification software doesn't mean that it can be used well. So just having something be able to work doesn't mean that it's going to be as user-friendly. And one of the things that is said about accessibility is that it should take the same amount of time for a person without a disability to use the resource as it should for a person with a disability to use the resource. That's considered equal access. So it shouldn't take a person with a disability more time to navigate and more clicks and more things to go through just to get to the same information. And then also user testing. Some products I know do have people come in who have disabilities and use their products to be able to tell them more from a first-hand basis how exactly their product works. Because some of the software is complicated. It's not always easy to know exactly how to use it, especially if you're not familiar with it. So really getting that first-hand look at the product and getting first-hand feedback can be an important part too. At Texas A&M, we've recently started to request VPATs, this voluntary product accessibility template from vendors. Every time we have a license come up for renewal, we've started to request it. Right now, it's not required for us to subscribe to a product, but we want to at least ask for it. We're starting to take note of who has those VPATs, and if they don't have a VPAT, we record that email, we keep it on our records. And if it gets bumped up to a certain level in our university contract administration, we actually have to put in an exception request. And as far as business resources are concerned, we typically file them under marketplace exceptions because at times there are things in business resources that we can't find other places, especially financial information that might not be available other places. But the university has made it very clear that these exception requests are not an excuse for not providing accessibility requirements. They are merely just a track record for the university to say that they assume a temporary risk until the product can be made accessible. So we're unsure right now how hard the university is going to come down on really requiring these completed VPATs. Right now, we have probably gone through the process with about 35 or so vendors. 5 of these have been business products. Only one of them has had a VPAT out of those. The other ones have said they don't know what it is, or they're not familiar with what it is. And one very much said point blank that we don't have it. And they were very transparent. They said that our main business is commercial clients. And that's where all of their money goes, is to developing their product content for commercial clients. And they don't have the resources to provide some of those accessibility requirements that are required to fill out the VPAT. So they were very transparent. I mean, it's good of that vendor to be transparent and realize that that's just not where their money can go at the moment. Yeah.
So the subtext is that nobody in industry settings has disability.
That's cool.
The legislation that you mentioned in the first slide, like I'm not familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it doesn't apply to private industry settings.
That's
Is
right.
it specifically for higher education?
It's for federal entities. And
Okay, so
so,
like all public sector,
right, right.
and universities do fall into that.
They do because they do receive federal money. And you think about initiatives, grants, sometimes they do receive federal money directly. And then oftentimes states will have their own similar accessibility requirements, similar to the federal code.
So it's more the case that, that those industry settings are just exempt from, like, basically those vendors are saying, like, we're just trying to follow the law, we don't actually want to make things better for people with disabilities.
I mean, I don't think it's quite as blatant as that, and I mean, I can't
You don't have
speak
to
for vendors.
speak for them.
But I think
I guess my point is just that those settings don't fall under the law.
they're very different, yeah, they're operating in very different contexts. So they're, as was said before, they're dealing with commercial clients, and they're focused on creating this really, sometimes intricate content that costs a lot of money, and they just don't have the resources to focus on accessibility. Whereas if you were maybe an academic vendor who sold a lot of products to academics, you would be very used to dealing with issues of accessibility because that would be what would be required of an academic product. So there's just a little bit difference of mindset, of awareness, I think, that kind of goes into this. And it's interesting to think about how that kind of plays out. And I don't think we need to vilify them, it's just, and it's also really hard to retrofit something, right? So if you have a product, it's a lot harder to go back and retrofit it for accessibility than if you were building a brand new product.
Yeah,
from the
but
ground up.
1978 was that law? I mean,
Yeah.
40 years might be enough time to start getting your stuff together.
Right. There's been several advents of the internet and technology and things like that that have kind of come up and made different requirements. So the basis of the VPAT, it outlines the standards of the section 508. So it kind of boils down these different standards. So there's different parts of the software, there's video, there's self-contained closed products. They kind of go through all the different standards of what makes an accessible product. And then the vendor is responsible for filling out the two right-hand columns. So they have to say, is it supported? Is it supported with exceptions? Or is it just not applicable because maybe they don't have media content in their product? So that particular little standard wouldn't apply to them. And then there's a spot for remarks and explanations. But these can be pretty free-form. So this is one example of, I think it's pretty well done VPAT. They actually have had a third party come in and do an assessment of their product and fill out a VPAT for them. This costs money for the vendor, obviously, but you can see that they have pretty intense explanations. They're pretty detailed. Even when you have something that's partially supported, they're pointing out what's partially supported and if they have plans to make it supported in the future. So they've really done a thorough job. And again, this is probably because this was reviewed by a third party. They had a third party who specializes in looking at things for accessibility to come in and look at this product and be able to give them all this feedback. So this is another VPAT from a different vendor, and it's looking at the same types of standards on the left. And you can see that their remarks are much less detailed. They're still supporting it, but they don't give as much detail. And I think one of the problems with the VPAT is that it's voluntary, and anybody can fill it out. So you might get really complex answers, or you might just get, the font size is utilized to convey importance. You might not even get as much detail with some of these VPATs, and it's all up to the vendor how detailed they want to be, or even what they want to put on there. And there's been some research done on VPATs about how true they are. And it was found that somewhere in the ballpark of 20% of VPATs have incorrect information or say that they support things that they don't, or maybe there was a product upgrade somewhere along the line and then something along the standards changed and it's no longer supported. So VPATs are a really great idea, and I think it's a move in the right direction, but anybody can fill these out from a vendor standpoint. And sometimes you have people, especially with the vendors who are telling us that they don't have any idea what they are, you sort of wonder who exactly is filling out these VPATs, and do they really understand the things that they're saying that it supports, and does that product really support it? And I would love as a librarian to go through all of our 60 plus business databases and try and find out if these things are really supported. But I don't have the know-how to do that, and I don't myself know how to necessarily say that something is accessible. Where do you draw that line? Is it support some things but not others? Is it still accessible? I think it would be really difficult to find a product that is 100% accessible and able to be used with all the different things that I mentioned before that make a product accessible. There are some toolbars and different things that you can use. Some of you might be familiar with Wave, and it's a toolbar extension that you can put in a URL of a website and be able to get results back. But again, this isn't clear cut either. This is one that I did on our homepage of the library. And it gives you have to know things about coding, right? So it's telling you that there's an error and there's an empty link. It's also giving you some indications about alerts. It's telling you about some alt text features that are going on. So there are some tools out there that are helpful, but again, you have to know how to interpret these things. And I don't know enough about accessibility code and computers and that end of the thing to really know what this means. If I did a run on a database and I wanted to determine if it was accessible or not, I'm not sure that there's really a good way that I could figure out on my own if something's accessible, because this sometimes doesn't mean a lot to me. And going through and trying to decide what is accessible and what does it mean is really challenging. So some of the challenges I think too, so we're trying with the VPAT, we're trying to raise knowledge of accessibility and why it's important, but we don't have a person that is tasked specifically with looking at accessibility. And I think that we just don't have the time or the resources right now, and I think that's the same for many institutions, to go through all of these databases and determine for ourselves if something is really accessible and if it is accessible as it says it is. And then once you have problems, like I was showing you with that Wave result, once you know that there's a problem, you have to have the people that can fix it or interpret the problems and be able to know why is this a problem and how are we going to fix it. And if it's on the vendor's end, that's not something that you can necessarily fix on the library side as well. And then for business resources, as we kind of touched on before, if they're not making products specifically for the academic universe, they don't really have a lot of incentives to make accessibility a forefront of their product offering. Again, they're dealing with commercial clients, and some of their main concerns are making sure that they have this really rich content for the commercial clients, and accessibility sometimes does not fall into what they're trying to do with their product. So those are just some, again, maybe not so many solutions, but hopefully opening up the door for some conversations that we can have. These are some references. I think, are these Catherine's?
Yeah, those are Catherine.
Okay. Catherine has references. She's fancy, so.
I was spouting statistics. I better have some references.
Yeah.
So I think we're open to discussing right now. We have about a half hour left.
And we basically, what do you guys want to talk about? We can ask questions. We have questions we can ask you. But if you have certain priorities you want to share, questions for us, are there certain things that you're really considering when you're making collections decisions? It's what this time is for. Yes.
I'll start with an easy one for Twitter. What was the name of the book you mentioned early in your?
There were two. One was Emily Drabinski's Queering the Catalog, and then the other was Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression. It wasn't too much.
Oh, I think there's a librarian at GVSU. Is that a place?
Yes.
Grand Valley State University.
Is that like near the Canadian border?
It's in Michigan. It's
in-
not,
okay.
yeah.
There's a librarian there who actually did similar analysis along the lines of Sophia Noble's research, and he applied that research to their discovery layer. So like,
I was wondering.
which
about
is
that,
not
yeah.
it's not quite like a content database or like a library resource, but
Yeah.
I can't remember Matthew something. He wears glasses, so that's
Oh, yeah, that guy.
and so he found extremely horrifying things, like when you do it, I remember in particular if it's like when you feel like feeling of grossness. So I remember that he found some kind of connection between a search for Black mothers and like unfit parenting or something like along those lines, where they were creating associations, like with the thesaurus language, like a controlled vocabulary language, that it like is recreating racism and oppression in like pretty obvious ways.
I will
I
look
think
for
he-
that.
I think they were, I think it was like the Summon Discovery Layer.
Yeah, I'll look for that. And I know Dr. Noble found similar things with Google, which is where she does most of her
Yeah.
research. A search for Black girls turned up porn, right? All porn. A search for white girls turned up like athletes, and yeah. Google has since fixed that particular search. So one term at a time, she's getting it done.
Yes.
Catherine, I was really intrigued with your analysis, because I also come from business and then into business librarian. And I'm just amazed at how much you've done. How much time do you have to devote to those kinds of analysis? Because I've been doing it for years, and it's like I haven't made it as far as you have. I'm trying to analyze it to that degree.
I think part of it is, well, I spent over a decade as a financial analyst, and this is my second career.
Yes,
And
mine
so
too.
I basically I did the same analysis, only I was, in this case, the salesperson, and my customers were basically robbing us blind. Like, we were making no money, we were losing money, and our sales reps were basically giving away just to make the sale, and there was no profit. For a lot of reasons, there were a lot of structural reasons. Let's just say this part of the business was, for a lot of years, a write-off for another part, and then they were told that you guys actually got to become profitable. So I spearheaded helping all our sales force learn how to analyze that. And so I'm taking, like, basically a methodology I've used it in the private sector to analyze our customer profitability, and I'm just kind of flipping it, like the idea of figuring out who your priorities are first, because that's the biggest impact. You do those, and then you move down the list.
Yeah, well, now the other thing I run into, which I'm sure everybody does, it's the shared resources too. It's like, okay, this might not be the best resource for this need, but we gotta buy it because it's either part of, well, I'm in Kentucky, so it's part of something the state's buying,
Yeah.
or it's something that we share with the law library, and so we have to use, so those pieces get into it, it really confuses your cleaning analytics.
It absolutely does, and so basically, it's funny, I've actually taken on an additional role at my library where I'm heading up an entire serial and e-resource review, and using some of the same methodologies, and as well as other things as well, and trying to come up with a process so that way we can evaluate what we have and see where our duplication is and where our unique content is, and mapping it to our actual needs. Because, and I'm not doing it just by myself. I have minions. I have colleagues. I have wonderful colleagues.
Problematic category.
But we want to make sure we buy what we need, and we want to but, you know, like, for instance, I was looking at one resource, and we have this, and we have that, and we have that. I'm like, well, I actually get those pieces of data from 3 other resources. Yes, you have this extra thing, but if I actually buy your thing, then I need to, because of where I am financially, because my budget hasn't been going up, I actually have to then think, what am I going to cut? That's
And some of them can't be cut.
and some of them can't be cut, and there's all these overlaps. And that's where I think my goal is to ultimately just have a lot of information and data that we can quickly access and reference, so we can plan ahead and be strategic in our decisions. And having, I think that this is a challenge a lot of libraries have, and it's the fact that we tend to have a lot of silos and a lot of pieces of information everywhere, and we have a lot of stories. I'm like, I've heard this, I've heard that, but we gotta have a way to bring it together internally, and we have, so that way we can basically not get to the last minute and go, oh, we gotta make this decision about renewal, and we got a price increase of this, and I I don't want to be making those decisions. I want to be thinking and looking at things 6 months ahead, and I want to have an honest conversation with my vendors. I want to go, okay, this is what's going on, this is where I'm at, this is what I think we can afford, and be very transparent. Because I'm like, I used to be on sales, so I know you guys have to make a profit too. I don't want to put you guys in the position that I was in, trying to turn around a paper mill. So it's you know, I want to have those honest, but you can only have those if you have the data. And I also find that doing that prep and having that ready before I get on the call, it makes for a stress-free phone call. Because I can just have a conversation and I'm not worried about, you know, I also know what I can afford to give and what I cannot afford to give by doing that type of preparation. And I know where my walk-away point is. And sometimes the answer is no. And it's time to walk out. But knowing when you can do that. But you can only do that if you map out and know what's core, what could we possibly substitute, or what, you can't do that if you, and so I haven't done it for everything yet. I'm basically working on it. How do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time.
Right.
I'm just starting with the priorities and moving down the list. And so doing that Pareto analysis basically helps me figure out what to document first. And once that's done, then that's easy because we just have to maintain. And then we work on the next chunk and we just keep moving. And so that's, yeah. That's what I'm doing.
Well, I think, great.
Yes.
So you mentioned metrics when you're evaluating resources. So the one that really seems like it has the most potential is cost per use. But to me, that's also the most unreliable one.
That's why you can't just look at it. You have to also look at all the qualitative stuff. And that's where curriculum mapping and looking at what your faculty is using for research is important, because it's unreliable. And so it's just.
Well, especially for databases.
Mhm.
You know, how do you really determine that? Because you have to depend on the information from the vendors and the reliability of their systems as well. So I almost ignore that one in a lot of cases, which is unfortunate because it's so important.
Well, and, come to Allison's session later, or Steve's session later, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's interesting as well, because with business databases, most of them are not just traditional article databases. And so measuring the usage of like, how many maps did I build in Simply Analytics, right? Like what does, Right.
And we also
Right,
plug
yeah.
in, there is an interesting presentation coming up at 2:30.
Yes.
And is it here?
It's somewhere in the Francis.
They're talking about,
Perfect.
yeah,
Yeah, we'll be there too.
Can we count
We're all
traditional
going.
ways to count databases, so
Okay.
it might be of interest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think sometimes the data is lacking for that, and then you have to look at everything else. You know, is it being used? Do you see it cited? Do you?
Right.
And we've sometimes used even like some like usage data or usage statistics that were astonishingly low, didn't culminate into a cancel decision. It culminated into an like our access points are broken discovery. So it's not always just like a black and white process. I was gonna ask Catherine, like when you said you are planning to look at cost per citation, are you talking about that strictly in like a journals and monograph
Yes.
environment? You're not talking about like where is like
That would be-
source cited and like student research. or
Yeah,
anything.
no, I was just talking about for my researchers and what journals they're using. And it's on my list of things to do, but as you can probably tell, I'm doing
A
all
little
of
busy.
Catherine works a lot, I can tell you this 100%.
Just to add to what this gentleman said about the unreliability of the stats you get out of vendors, there's an article coming out of California Digital Libraries, I think, has got an article in the hopper at College of Research Libraries, where they show that with these electronic journal packages, some of the publishers are double counting downloads, because if they've got their articles set up so that when you click on the link and it takes you to the HTML, and then you click on the PDF, that's 2 downloads.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the publishers are a little worse about it than others. So,
Like who?
Taylor and Francis is the good guy in the distribution. Wiley, Elsevier, Nature the relationship between Nature's downloading and the citation rate for Nature's publications is somewhat distorted because of all of those Nature branded titles. They've got those research summaries. Those things get downloaded, but they don't get cited. But look for it.
Yeah, I'll watch for that, thank you.
They actually give you a formula for how to adjust your usage numbers from each of the publishers.
Oh, that is interesting.
So we are doing some similar things as Texas and accessibility. We did we called it a VPAT audit across disciplines this year. And so I'm up to speed on how things that we procure. But I'm curious about, the Berkeley situation where they had to take down the instructional videos that they created. What about things like our libguides? Are they falling under that same purview because we created?
I think it's anything that can be accessed online is an information resource, so really anything is fair game. And I think up until now, it's been mostly just public-facing content. There's been a lot of things about just the university web pages in general. Because those are the things that you see, and they're easy things to go after if you're looking for problems. But I think people are going to be becoming a lot more concerned about these things, especially with
Touted tools, they not.
Well, right,
Both
you can design your LibGuide to be accessible.
Sure.
And it's funny, because right now we have a task force where we're basically in there's gonna be an audit in the spring. Like, we're internally doing an audit in the spring, and everybody's supposed to have gone through and made everything. And not to be punished, but it is not gonna be a punishment. It's more of, hey, these are the elements that aren't accessible still. And so that way, and I think we as librarians need to be saying, we need to do this. We all need to do audits of what we're producing. Like that reminds me, I need to schedule some time in the recording booth, because I have, out of my 22 guides, I have one video that is not accessible that I have to do before the end of the year. And it's at the top of my to-do list when I get back.
So Amy, I want to put you on the spot here. I'm sorry. I have recently been exchanging emails with Gail about accessibility with Michelle. And I know she sent me some content saying that what you do is above and beyond the BiPAP, but I didn't get a chance to read it before coming to the conference. Can you tell me what you guys are doing that's above and beyond the BiPAP? You may not know, and that's okay.
I don't know exactly what Michelle is referring to. I can tell you that my morning was spent on accessibilities and VPATs, just because of some of our product lines, trying to get them up to date from 2.0 to 2.1, and working with some of our Cengage partners on the accessibility and VPAT. So it's very large in what we do in our product organization, but I'm not sure what Michelle is talking about from the above and beyond piece.
I'll just have to read her email.
Yeah, I know as we are migrating products to our newest platforms, those have been built with those accessibility standards in mind. And so for one of our products that we're currently building the business case, a large part of that business case is the accessibility of this product currently is not where it needs to be. So we need to migrate it. Harder product to, or harder argument to make with leadership if we can't also say, and we'll get this return out of it. But that's the kind of thing we're having to do as we're building and updating products. And it becomes more problematic with partner products, but we're also pushing with partners on that end as well, because we know that it's huge.
Right.
Sure. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say the Big Ten, I know the Big Ten Alliance recently, we signed it, we have a deal with them, and all of our contracts now from all Big Ten libraries have to have this accessibility language in them, or we can't sign, right? And we just can't have deals with vendors anymore, so.
Yeah, and we're running into that too, and you know me in a business context, I also manage science products, and so we've got these interactive products that very cool, you can take apart body parts, and great learning tool for students, but the way the activities were built, they can't, right now within the activity, they aren't keyboard navigable.
Right.
And it's like we have to go back and retrofit all of those activities and to do it in such a way where it's just as fast as clicking to go through the 500 structures that are in this part of the human body. That's going to be a big challenge, but it's one of those that we know we have to do that if we're going to continue to sell into the academic market.
Is that more of the internal push, or are you finding that there's an outside push from academic entities to
It is-
make accessibility?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're hearing it from sales, like we can't sell this kind of thing. We're also on renewals, people are asking like, one of the issue I was dealing with this morning was, okay, we need this by tomorrow, this updated VPAT, or we have to cancel this product.
So a question for everybody, how are you all dealing, like, Amy works for Gale, they primarily sell to academia,
Yeah.
which is great because then great for us because then you feel the pressure of
Right.
us not being able to buy. As business librarians, that's not most of our resources. Does anybody have any ideas for what we can do with like talking to S&P or, any of these vendors who have these consumer surveys, we're like such a small fish to them,
Does the American with Disabilities Act cover any of this? Any way to interpret it at all?
I don't think so.
The thing that I was thinking about is, from a business standpoint, there's a lot of talk about corporate ethics. So from a business standpoint, being ethical in a corporate sense would mean making your products accessible. Because yes, there are people with disabilities working in the business world, and imagine there's quite a few of them. But that's not something that means anything coming from us as an academic buying the product, because most of their money is coming from commercial clients. So that would need to be something that commercial clients are bringing up to really make a bigger impact. Not saying that it's not an important conversation, but it's hard to know how far that would go on the academic side.
I just think it would be really, I think I said this at a presentation last year, was be really horrible not to have the next Warren Buffett just because a financial database isn't screen reader compatible.
Right.
So
What is our time?
we have 13 minutes.
Oh, okay,
So we
cool.
still have plenty of
Good.
time.
Okay, good.
So,
Do you ever deal with accessible PDFs? Is that a situation that you've come across? So we're redesigning our website, and we were just told that you can't post PDFs unless they're accessible. So contacting the vendor and said, "Oh, I've never heard of an accessible PDF. I don't know what you're talking about."
yes.
It probably needs OCR, right?
Yeah, well, it's OCR. Actually, if you have Adobe, I did this with a lot of my content that's on my libguides where I have cheat sheets. Adobe Acrobat, you can use that, and they have tools that test for accessibility, and you will make sure that you structure it, whether or not you use headings, so it's screen reader compatible, so it's all of that in OCR. And so yes, PDFs basically just need to go through that process. So if you have a PDF, the problem is vendor PDFs aren't always designed, because a lot of them, I'm thinking of some cheat sheets that I use. They're half marketing, half cheat sheet, and they are not designed to be accessible. But I've gone through and redesigned all of my lesson plan worksheets, everything this year in Adobe Acrobat, running their tools for accessibility. And when you do that, you can usually edit and make changes within the document itself.
A big thumbs up to Adobe, because also Photoshop, you can test for colorblind accessibility as well, make sure the colors that you're using can be seen by everyone.
So if you receive a PDF from a vendor, do you feel like it's okay to run that analysis and then make changes if you need to?
I haven't actually made changes to vendor handouts. I've just made sure all the content I've created is accessible. I have made some of my own handouts where I consolidated information from various sources. I'm specifically thinking like Bloomberg functions, that type of thing. And I haven't tested Bloomberg's handouts. I don't know. They very well may be compatible. But I knew that my students didn't want to go through 10 handouts when I could get everything they wanted on one page and make sure it was accessible. So I'm very conscious about designing my own support products for my students.
I don't know, when we were forced to make sure our libguides were accessible, if the PDFs that we created would do, if it was a vendor PDF and it didn't pass, they wouldn't let us put it up. We could link to the vendor site, which was more inconvenient,
Right.
but we could not put it on our website as a PDF or attach it to anything.
Right.
I mean, now those were the rules. I'm not sure who made those rules and where, you know, where, if it was an outside, you know, a site, a company that was approving it, that we were using, or if it was an internal university thing.
The irony there is that clicking out, like externally, is actually worse for a lot of these programs.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean,
So-
I was arguing it didn't make sense,
Well,
but it's what they
probably-
did force us to do, because that made, then whatever rigor they were putting our libguides
Right,
through
it's not
passed.
your website anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's still like, it just makes it worse for people using programs
I agree.
that.
Right.
I agree with you.
It's
Yeah,
like, it's like a double whammy.
yeah, it was a catch-22 of it,
Yeah.
but then our website passed, so we had to do it that way.
Yes.
Hi, I'm from EBSCO Information Services. My name's Michael, and I'm in the content management department, so I don't really know much about the sales part or the pricing part, but I am involved with products like Business Source Complete, and so I'm wondering if there's anything librarians in the room would want to tell us about products like that with accessibility, with content coverage. Are there things that would make that more valuable? Are there particular publishers on such products that could do better with accessibility? Like what are things that could be improved that would help make those more valuable to users?
Good question. Yeah.
So this isn't related to accessibility, but we use Business Source Complete, Hospitality and Tourism Complete quite a bit. So occasionally I'll come across a journal that we would like to be aggregated, but I really haven't had much success getting that to happen, so I don't really know. Is there a good avenue to request that? I've spoken with a couple of EBSCO representatives, and they said they're working on it, but we've never really been able to do it.
Yeah, that happens frequently because it's not a decision that our department, we have a product group and they have different decisions that they decide whether or not they want to index a journal or aggregate and put it in there. So I think in that case, maybe there was something about that content that they didn't have the right licensing to put it in there, or there's some other thing blocking that. But I think in that case, the best way would be working with your rep and following up and finding out if there was, whether it's still stuck in process with someone or whether there's actually been a final decision and they just never closed the loop on your end.
Okay.
I would think it would probably be that case, unfortunately.
Sure, okay.
My advice, and I have never tested one of your PDFs, so they may already be this way, is, because a lot of students are looking for full text, and is making sure that when you're creating PDFs with full text, that they have been basically tested with Adobe Acrobat. So that they are, in fact, that, you know, the part of the process is it checks for reading order, headings. It will look at images, and if there's an image, it will give a text alternative to that image. And so making sure that your PDFs have all those pieces, so it is readable to someone using a screen reader that it has a visual impairment. Also, of course, and I'm like, I know that, you know, I've already seen the fact that sometimes things you can listen to it, which is great feature. I think, like, I would, and you already might be doing this. I haven't tested it. I would say that's the big thing that I would point out. If it's not happening, there should be a move to do it. And it may be, I've just never tried.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I think that's the thing with a lot of our resources too, is if we don't have enough time, as much as we would like to go through and confirm that everything is accessible. I mean, I think we subscribe to over 60 plus business databases at my institutions, so trying to keep tabs on all of those and go through and determine, you know, what's accessible and what's not. And it's almost, you don't think about that until you have a need for it, until somebody needs to use a screen reader or something with a particular product and it doesn't work and you're going,
I
I
think
know
that's a
that
great
has
point, because I know the push we've had internally to do better on accessibility has been related to having reflowable full text on the product. But that doesn't account for whether that Adobe PDF, so if somebody wants to look at the PDF but also have it go through a reader or some other tool, that's another thing to make sure that it's not necessarily enough just to have that full text in the record. The PDF that accompanies it, if there is one accompanying it, also should still be.
It should be accessible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, few things. We're trying to actually work that into our workflow, not for existing resources, but for trials. So at least there we can begin henceforward
Right.
to do something, and it can be a great negotiating tool, like, hi, we really like your product, here's why we're not gonna subscribe. So hi, I'm Jessica, I'm from Western Carolina University, and incidentally, we have an opening for a business librarian. And I'm getting really tired of doing collection development for business in the interim. So to answer your question about content, one of the things that I'm looking for, and I was really intrigued, Heather, by what you said about analyzing, content of databases and electronic resources, because a lot has been done with monographs, but where do you even begin with databases? But I was kind of researching this topic a few weeks ago and found a 2018 article that said in introductory economics textbooks, women were mentioned as economists like 3% of the time, of actual economists. Now, of people in general, they were mentioning women up to like 20% of the time, it was like ancillary things. And then for people of color, it was like also really bad, and when they were mentioned, they were celebrities or something like that, not economists. So you don't even have control over what content is produced generally. But somehow we need to be putting pressure on content creators of business and other disciplines to maybe not be racist and sexist. And I know it's not intentional. Not like, let's exclude the women from our econ textbooks. Right. But if they could be conscious of it when they're creating it. And I would love to start saying no to some things. Like, yeah, I scanned through all the articles that were featured on your database homepage. They were all written by men. Or all of them talked about, something like them. Be like, yeah, so this is why we're not going to get your product.
Well, and something else that I worry about is the way we are kind of segregating our collections, right? Like I buy all these LGBTQ things over here, and I buy all this business stuff over here. And I'm very fortunate in that I work at a large institution with a large budget, and I can buy this piece over here. But what about smaller institutions who can't? And then what information are the whole accessibility issue on all levels, right? Yeah.
Right. Accessibility and representation.
Yeah, representation, absolutely, yes.
Do you teach?
Yes.
So I'm a collections librarian for business and social science, and I have a counterpart who does all of the IL instruction for business. And she's been trying to deploy CritLib in small ways in her teaching. She said it's really, really hard and mostly disheartening. She went into an HR class and used a DACA example. I don't know what the connection all was, but in the end, these HR students were like, we should support DACA because they make money for the economy.
Oh no, that's
they're humanities.
Okay, yeah.
So do you integrate this sort of conversation into your teaching, and if so, are you finding that faculty and students are they receptive? Does it give them pause? Do they just think you're a wacky leftist?
So I'm very fortunate in that I actually teach my own credit courses. So in those classes, it's very easy to work this type of stuff in because we do a lot of business cases, and then
you do all the marketing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I mean, when I'm talking about where this information has come from, we have a bigger conversation about evaluating information. I actually use a lot of the Calling Bullshit content. If you're familiar with that, callingbullshit.org. So it's a class that's taught at
University of Washington, go Huskies.
Sorry. UW.
Might have went there.
But they have all their content online, freely available. They have all their lectures, all of their cases, and things like that. And it's just a deeper dive into evaluating information in our current climate and the current ways that data is presented, right? So not even political, but just data comes at us in a multitude of ways now, and a lot of it is bullshit. And how do you figure that out? So we talk about that, and then I also talk about, again, the way that these these databases are gathering their information, right? So when we talk about these consumer surveys, we talk again about who's being missed, right? Like what information is this really covering? How can we use this to make evidence-based decisions in a business context, right? So we do get to talk about that, but again, it's because I'm in this very privileged position of having my own classes.
All right, it is 2:15, so what I would like to do is thank you all
Yes.
for being
Thank you so
great
much.
audience who has conversed with us. Thank you very much.